A crow may never forget your insult. There is a man in Seattle who cannot walk to work anymore. Not because of an injury, not because of traffic, because every single morning, without fail, a crow waits for him at the corner of his street, and when he appears, it dives. It screams. It follows him for 3 blocks. Every day. For 2 years straight. He doesn't know what he did. That's the part that should keep you up at night. He genuinely cannot remember doing anything to that bird. But the crow remembers him. Perfectly. And whatever happened between them, that crow decided it was unforgivable. Before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly how that is possible, and you are going to look at every crow you've ever passed on the street in a completely different way. But first, I need to tell you something about your own brain, because understanding what makes crows terrifying starts with understanding something most people don't know about themselves. The things scientists got wrong for 100 years, for most of modern history. The scientific consensus was simple: birds are not intelligent. They operate on instinct, hardwired responses. Biological programming. The phrase bird brain didn't become an insult by accident. It came from a century of scientists agreeing that the avian brain was too small, too primitive, too simple to produce anything resembling real thought, and they had a reason to believe this. A very good reason. In mammals, in you, in every primate. In every creature we consider genuinely intelligent, complex thought happens in the neo. It's the outer layer of the brain, folded and dense, the result of hundreds of millions of years of It is, by most definitions, the seat of consciousness, of planning, of memory, of everything that makes a mind a mind. Birds don't have a neo. For 100 years, that was the end of the argument. No neocortex, no real intelligence. Case closed. Then, in the early 2000s, a group of neuroscientists decided to look closer. Not because they expected to find anything, but because some crow behaviors had been so bizarre, so inexplicable through the lens of pure instinct, that something wasn't adding up. What they found didn't just change the way we think about crows. It changed the way we think about intelligence itself. Crows have a brain region called the pallium. Structurally, it looks nothing like the human knee. It doesn't have the same layers. It doesn't have the same architecture. But when scientists began mapping its function, tracking which neurons fired during which tasks, they discovered something almost impossible. The pallium does the same things the neocortex does. Planning, abstract reasoning, long-term memory, facial recognition, cause and effect, future projection. Evolution had found 2 completely separate roads to the same destination, and one of those roads ended in a bird that weighs less than half a kilogram. Hold that thought, because we're coming back to it. And when we do, what it means for your daily life is going to be much stranger than you're currently expecting. What they can actually do. Let's talk about what crow intelligence looks like in practice. Because the theory is one thing, but the documented behavior is something else entirely. In 2002, a crow named Betty made international headlines. Betty was being studied at Oxford University. In one experiment, researchers placed food at the bottom of a vertical tube, too deep to reach with a beak. They gave Betty 2 tools, a straight piece of wire and a hooked piece of wire. Betty chose the hook, solved the problem immediately. Then researchers removed the hook, left only the straight wire. Betty picked up the straight wire, looked at the tube, looked at the wire, then bent the wire against the edge of the container, creating her own hook, and retrieved the food. She had never done this before. She had never been taught. She observed a problem, invented a solution, and executed it using a material she had just modified for the purpose. When this experiment was published, the scientific community had one of those quiet, uncomfortable moments where everyone in the room realizes that a fundamental assumption has just collapsed. But Betty was just the beginning. In subsequent experiments across multiple research institutions, crows were presented with puzzles that required sequential reasoning. Not just solve this problem, but solve this problem, which gives you access to this tool, which allows you to solve the next problem, which leads to the food. multi-step planning. Delayed gratification. The ability to hold a goal in mind across multiple actions. Crows passed every test. In one particularly striking study, a crow was shown that a heavy ball dropped into a tube would trigger a mechanism that released food. The crow was then given a choice of objects, light balls, heavy balls, irregularly shaped items. It consistently selected the heavy balls. It understood the principle, not just the action, the principle behind the action. That is not instinct. Instinct cannot generalize. Instinct cannot understand a principle and apply it to a new situation. What crows demonstrated in those labs was something that developmental psychologists associate with children around the age of 5 to 7 years old. And now I want to bring you back to the man in Seattle who can't walk to work. Because understanding what crows can do in a laboratory is one thing. Understanding what they choose to do in the real world with those same cognitive abilities is where this story gets truly unsettling. The face, John Marzliff, had spent years studying crows at the University of Washington when he designed what would become one of the most referenced experiments in animal cognition research. The question he wanted to answer was simple. Do crows remember individual human faces? Not just person versus non-person, but specific faces. Yours versus mine. To test this, his team put on masks. Rubber Halloween masks. A caveman face. They wore these masks while capturing crows on campus, banding them, holding them briefly, then releasing them. Then they walked around campus in those same masks. The crows reacted immediately. Alarm calls, dive bombing. Following, every crow that had been captured responded to the mask with what can only be described as targeted aggression toward a recognized individual threat. But here is the part of this experiment that Marzliff himself described as the most surprising result of his career. Crows that had never been captured began reacting to the mask. Within weeks, then months, the number of birds responding to the masked researchers grew from the original captured birds to dozens, then to more than 60 individuals who had no direct experience with those researchers whatsoever. They had been told, somehow, through crow communication, through observation, through social transmission, the information had spread. This face is dangerous. This face means harm. Avoid it. Scold it. Make sure everyone knows. Marzliff's team continued the study for years. 5 years later, researchers wearing those original masks were still being mobbed by crows on that campus. The original captured birds had, in some cases, died. Their offspring, who had never experienced the capture event, continued the response. The information had been passed down across a generation. Now, I want you to stop for a moment and sit with what that actually means. A crow saw a face, associated it with a threat, communicated that association to its social network. That network spread the information further, and the record of that face, and the judgment attached to it, survived the death of the original witness, and was inherited by the next generation. That is not animal behavior in any sense we were prepared for. That is the foundation of culture. The grudge economy. Let's talk about what crows do with the enemies they remember, because it goes far beyond avoidance. There are documented cases, multiple, across different countries of crows engaging in what researchers carefully describe as sustained negative social attention toward specific individuals, which is the scientific way of saying, a crow decided you are its enemy, and it is making your life difficult on purpose. In Japan, where the urban crow population is particularly dense and well studied, researchers documented a case where a single man had thrown a stone at a crow near his apartment building. Within days, a group of crows had begun targeting his car, scratching the paint, leaving droppings specifically on his windshield, and pulling at the rubber seals around his windows. His neighbors' cars were untouched. This continued for months. The man eventually moved. There is something in that story that feels almost medieval. A creature deciding that you have committed an offense, rallying its community, conducting a sustained campaign of disruption, waiting you out But here is what makes this more than just an interesting story about a vindictive bird. What crows are doing in these situations requires a cascade of cognitive operations that most animals are simply not capable of. They have to recognize a specific individual. They have to retain that recognition over time. They have to connect an original event to an ongoing response. They have to communicate that information socially. They have to coordinate behavior with other individuals toward a shared goal. And they have to sustain all of this across days, weeks, months, without the original trigger being present to remind them. Every single one of those steps requires a kind of mental architecture that, until very recently, scientists believed existed only in humans and a handful of great apes. And there is one more element to this that I have been holding back, because I think it is the most disturbing part of everything we know about crow intelligence, and I want you to have the full picture before I tell it to you. The gift we've talked about what crows do to their enemies. Now let's talk about what they do to their friends. Gabby Mon was 4 years old when she started feeding crows outside her family's home in Seattle. Not intentionally at first. She was just a small child who dropped food, and crows are opportunists. But she noticed they kept coming back, so she started leaving food for them deliberately. Every day, by the time Gabby was 8, the crows had started leaving things for her. Small objects placed on the platform where she left their food. A piece of blue glass, a small black button, a miniature light bulb, a rusted screw, a piece of foam with the letters BEST printed on it, a tiny silver heart. Over the following years, Gabby collected hundreds of these objects. Her family kept them in labeled bags, each tagged with the date it appeared. Researchers who examined the collection confirmed what the family already suspected. The crows were not dropping random debris. They were selecting objects and placing them deliberately. Disparabio, bringing objects to a human who provides food, has now been documented in multiple locations with multiple individuals, and it presents a problem for every simple explanation of crow behavior. Because this is not instinct. There is no biological drive in a crow that says bring small human objects in exchange for food. This is learned, intentional, and the word researchers use carefully but consistently reciprocal. The crows understood that Gabby gave them something, and they gave something back. In human social science, this kind of exchange is studied under the framework of reciprocal altruism, the practice of trading value with another individual to build and maintain a relationship over time. It requires the ability to track who gave you what, to remember what you owe, and to understand that maintaining the relationship has future value. It requires, in other words, a theory of social investment in crows. The funeral there is one more behavior that I need to tell you about, because it is the one that, when I first encountered the research, made me genuinely stop and reconsider everything I thought I understood about what consciousness might look like in a non-human animal. When a crow dies, the other crows gather. Not to eat crows do not scavenge their own. They gather and they stand. They are loud on approach, calling and circling. Then they go quiet. They remain near the body, sometimes for 10 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer. Then they leave. Together, scientists initially dismissed this as territorial behavior, crows marking a location as dangerous. But the more carefully they studied it, the more complicated the picture became. Marsliff's team conducted controlled experiments, exposing crows to dead crows in different conditions alongside a stuffed hawk, alongside a person who had previously threatened them, alongside nothing at all. What they found was that crows near a dead crow without any other threat stimulus still gathered, still went quiet, still showed behavioral signs of what the researchers described as heightened emotional arousal. But here is the piece that changed the interpretation entirely. After a crow funeral, the flock avoided that location. 4 days, sometimes weeks. They were more cautious, more alert, more likely to mob potential threats in the vicinity. The death had not just registered as a data point. It had changed their behavior in a sustained, generalized way. They were not just avoiding the spot where something dangerous had happened. They were living more carefully, as if something had reminded them of their own mortality. I am not going to tell you that crows understand death the way humans do. The research doesn't support that claim, and I won't make it. But I will tell you what the research does support. Crows respond to death in a way that is not mechanical, not reflexive, not simple. It changes them, and the change lasts. What they know about Eula's return, one final time, to the question of faces. Because everything we've covered, the tool use, the planning, the grudges, the gifts, the funerals, all of it comes together in the way crows perceive individual humans. When a crow looks at you, it is not seeing human. It is running a recognition process that tracks the geometry of your face, your movement patterns, your height, your hair, the way you hold your shoulders, the specific path you take through their territory. It is building a file on you. If you have done nothing to threaten a crow, that file is neutral, possibly positive, if you've ever inadvertently left food near crow territory. The crow is simply monitoring. But if you have ever, even once, done something that a crow registered as a threat, startled one near its nest, made a sudden movement near a juvenile, thrown something, Eben Hawkinley shouted. Eben moved too quickly through territory during nesting season. That file changed, and it was shared. The research suggests that in dense urban areas, cities where crow populations are large and stable, individual humans are known by the local crow community not as a type, as individuals, with histories, with reputations. You have a reputation with the crows in your neighborhood. You just don't know what it is. The deepest question here is what I keep coming back to after spending a long time with this research. We built a world, a civilization, a system of cities and infrastructure and social organization. And we did it because we are intelligent, because we can plan, remember, communicate, cooperate, and pass knowledge down to the next generation. We are the dominant species on Earth because of our minds. And somewhere in that world, in the trees along your street and the rooftops of your city, there is a creature that has quietly developed every single one of those capacities. Not to the same degree, but in the same direction: planning, remembering, communicating, cooperating, teaching. The crow did not evolve these abilities in isolation. The leading scientific theory, social brain hypothesis, argues that cognitive complexity emerges in response to social complexity. The more intricate the relationships an animal must navigate, the more sophisticated the mind required to navigate them. Crows live in communities with shifting alliances, with individuals who can be trusted or deceived, with enemies and friends whose identities must be tracked over years. They live, in other words, in a social world that placed exactly the same pressures on their minds that human social life placed on ours. And so they built something like what we built. Not identical, not as vast, but recognizably the same kind of thing. A mind that watches, judges, remembers, and plans. The man in Seattle who can't walk to work anymore, I started with him, and I want to end with him, because his situation contains the whole story. He doesn't know what he did. Maybe he did nothing. Maybe the crow mistook him for someone else. A documented phenomenon in crow behavior, where individuals who resemble known threats get treated as threats themselves. Maybe he did something small and unremembered. A gesture, a moment of impatience, a startled reaction that looked to a crow watching from a wire like aggression. Whatever it was Inug, because a crow saw his face, formed a judgment, remembered it through every season, every distraction, every competing demand of its life, and decided, in whatever way a crow decides things, that the account was not settled. A crow may never forget your insult. The next time you walk past one, perched on a wire, watching you with that sideways stillness, ask yourself something. Is it seeing a stranger, or is it remembering?